When you think about hurricane preparedness, does it feel pointless because the chance of your community getting wind or flood impacts this year is relatively low? Or perhaps you want to do something to prepare, but you feel overwhelmed and don't know where to start. On this episode of the GeoTrek podcast, Haskell Moore, president and owner at Hurricane Preparedness Training and Consulting, LLC, shares how we can have a mindset of preparedness while providing practical steps to walk us through the details of preparing for hurricanes. Hey everyone, I'm Hurricane Hal, host of the GeoTrek podcast, where we explore the world to bring you stories about extreme weather and natural disasters not covered by the mainstream media. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow our content on your favorite podcast platform, as well as our growing YouTube channel. You can actually watch video footage of these interviews with professionals who are going to help us be better prepared for natural disasters. A more formal introduction of this episode's guest, Haskell Moore is president and owner of Hurricane Preparedness Training and Consulting, LLC, and has specialized in disaster preparedness education since 1999, with a concentrated focus on hurricane preparedness since 2005. He provides training and consulting services focused on helping organizations, employees, and families prepare for hurricanes, tropical storms, flooding events, extended power outages, and related emergencies. Well, without further introduction, let's jump into this episode of the GeoTrek podcast with Haskell Moore. Haskell, thank you so much for taking time to come on the GeoTrek podcast.
Thanks, Hal. It's great to be here.
Haskell, we're excited to hear about your story getting into disaster preparedness, a lot of the work that you do, the education you do. But before we get into your story, we wanted to start with some of the resources and opportunities that you can offer our audience. Let's start with your website, hidefromthewind.com. What are some things that people can find when they go to that website?
Yeah, so that came from the run from the water, hide from the wind. On the website, there are some just general hurricane preparedness items. There are several checklists out there that are extremely useful. There are several templates. I'll be talking about three of those here as we go along. There's also some discount codes. There's a link to buy my book, Hurricane Preparedness for the Home and Family. And by the way, all the proceeds from this book go to the Louisiana Cajun Navy. I don't make anything on the sale of the book. And then we have a link. I'm a brand ambassador, brand affiliate for Furman Power Equipment. And you can go out to the FurmanPowerEquipment.com website and make a selection on generators, supplies, and accessories. And at checkout, enter Prepare30. That's Prepare30 at the discount code, and you'll get 30% off your entire purchase. Also, I'm a brand ambassador for Maglite flashlights. I've been carrying these things around with me since 1999. I got my first flashlight, Maglite. This is the ML300L4D LED long-running flashlight. I tested over 200 flashlights. This is the best disaster preparedness, hurricane preparedness, prepper, all-around flashlight that I think you could buy. And you can go to maglite.com and at checkout enter Hurricane 10 and get 10% off your entire purchase there. I also have a series going in the Post newspaper down in Galveston. You can go to thepostnewspaper.net and just do a search on my first name, Haskell. And I think there's 8 or 10 articles that I've written out there over the last 2 or 3 years, and you can check those out as well.
Haskell, our audience is going to love that not only are you an expert in this field, but you have a lot of resources, things you've written, checklists you've put together, and your book as well. We're going to talk about all of that on the podcast today, and I think it's really going to help our audience be better prepared, not only for hurricanes, but for disasters in general. But before we get into that, we wanted to hear your story. How did you get involved in disaster and hurricane preparedness? Share a little bit about your professional path into that work.
Okay. So it started in 1999. I was doing a preparedness session getting folks ready for the potential impacts of Y2K, which turned out to be basically a big nothing for the most part, but it certainly had the potential to be a real problem. And so I was teaching folks, especially around emergency power generation and so forth, and that sort of took on a life of its own. It wasn't a real big deal, but I was doing the occasional seminar on those. And then at 2005, I was working at BP. You may know it as British Petroleum was their old name. And I had a team from India working with me. And it was about 3 weeks after Hurricane Katrina had hit. And then Hurricane Rita reared its ugly head out in the Gulf. And everybody was freaking out, especially these guys I had from India who thought it was going to be a repeat of Katrina in Houston. I thought, well, I better settle these guys down before they get on a plane and go home. So we sat down. I put together a checklist of to-do items, a checklist of things they needed to have on hand. And we sat down for about an hour. And they got up. They were feeling a whole lot better about things. And so I kind of got them settled down. Went back to my desk, sat down, and 15 minutes later, I had a line all the way down the hall of people wanting that checklist. So I said, I think we got a teachable moment here. So I went to the VP of our division and said I'd like to start a series on hurricane preparedness to help people get ready for the storms. And she said, absolutely fine, go for it. Don't let it interfere with your day job. And we were off to the races. So I did that in lunch and learn sessions for the department in 2000 and let's see, that was 5, then starting in 6 and 7. And in 2008, early in the season, on the first session I did, the VP of the campus came to see the seminar. It was really outside of what she would normally do, but she had heard about it and heard people say good things. So she came and attended it. And we only had about 18 or 20 people in those at a time. And she said, I want you to take this campus wide. We'll reserve the cafeteria in that area, and you can team up with one of our meteorologists, and you guys can come down and do a session. And I said, I have 2 great fears, that nobody shows up or that everybody shows up. And on the first one, we had 225 people show up. And on the second one, we capped out at 280, and we had to start turning people away. And over the subsequent years, we ran over 8,000 people through that, and I had a couple of thousand through other consulting engagements that I did. So we've had about 10,000 people through the live seminars.
Haskell, for context, when you were doing this training with BP, I think you were living in the Houston metro area. Is that correct?
Right.
So
yeah.
this is interesting because that's an area vulnerable both industrially and economically, but also for people's personal lives. I'm curious, when you had these checklists, was that more how to prepare business and industry, or how to prepare yourself, or kind of both?
So I have done some consultation with small companies, and then I was the global IT crisis manager at BP before I left there in 2020. But basically what we found out is if we can have people concentrating on their job when they get back to work, as opposed to worrying about their home, worrying about having to remediate and deal with damages, just to know that their family is okay in case they have to evacuate to our DR center. We found that it was really a huge help to get their homes and their cars and their children and their pets and everything ready before the storm hit. And if they had less damage, they could get back to work quicker. Obviously, hopefully fewer injuries and so forth. So that's what we did, is we were concentrating on the people aspect of it. And then, of course, I also had to concentrate on the big picture of watching over 20,000 servers in 4 data centers and 1 high-performance computing center.
Haskell, we've heard of similar stories on the podcast where people say, yes, we had to prepare our business, but ultimately if the employees were so stressed out about their homes and their families, they couldn't focus on business. So really it's a lot of it is personal preparedness as well. That's so interesting how you got started on that. I wanted to get into you now, hear about your perspectives on some of those first steps that people can take. Let's say going into hurricane season, or maybe there's even a storm out there. What are some of the first steps that people can do to start preparing for hurricane season?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you don't hear anything else I say, if you're getting ready to take a nap, well, this is not the time to do it. Give me 5 minutes here. And it's so simple, yet it's so powerful to start out. And people used to come to me all the time, how do we get started? You know, you've given us this wealth of material, all of this information in your session. Where do we even begin? So it's simple. You begin with three simple checklists. The first one is a hurricane preparedness action plan. And by the way, all three of these are out on my website. Again, hidefromthewind.com. Just go out to checklist, and there are these three lists are out there that you can download. They're in Excel format, but you can open those with the free Google Sheets if you want. So in other words, you don't have to go out and get Excel to open these. But on the hurricane preparedness action plan, what you do, and again, these are prioritized lists, so you know what needs to get your attention first. You have your priority, you have your line item. In other words, if you're going to purchase a generator, purchase gas cans, flashlights, water bob, storage bladder, all those things, the quantity, and then the cost of the items that you'll be purchasing. You get those that's part of the pre-planning list. And then for the actual hurricane preparedness list, you will need to start with again, a prioritized list. You will have what you're going to be doing, the order in which you'll be doing it, and an estimate of how long it will take to do it, and who the person is that is actually going to be doing that task. That comes in handy if you have several members of your home who will be simultaneously doing different tasks. And it's also important that when you're putting that list together, if you have children who are old enough to be helping with that, especially when you get into teenagers. And the good thing about teenagers is they have a propensity to think outside the box. Like as we get older, we tend to box ourselves into certain procedures. If you have teenagers who can think outside the box, they can bring a lot of help to that equation when you sit down as a family at a kitchen table and go over these things. So with that, you have listed everything that they need to do, and then they know when they look at it on the checklist what is really expected, even though it may be written on the checklist. And where that comes from is my friend who had two teenage boys, and he told them to go take all of the plywood out of the garage that they were going to use to cover the windows, move the pool furniture into the garage, and then they would put the plywood up on the windows. Well, he goes off and he's out running errands, and he comes back, and all the lawn furniture's in the garage, all the pool furniture's in the garage. And he asked them where the plywood was, and they said, uh-oh, it's behind all the furniture. So they had to start over and pull everything out and put it back in. So having them present during that planning session is very useful. And then finally, a prioritized list of things that you will need, last-minute shopping item. And again, by priority. And one of the things that I'd advocate, well, a couple of things. First of all, anytime you have to-do list items that involved gasoline or infant supplies like baby formula and diapers, make sure those are really, really high on the list. Gasoline is the most emotional commodity before a hurricane. Gasoline will take you to the store. Gasoline will take you to work. It'll get you to the hospital. It'll allow you to go check on, elderly parents. Gasoline is mobility. Then as you are going down your list, or as you get to the store, one thing I would reiterate is when you see something on the shelf that you need, don't make the mistake of saying, okay, I'll come back in 15 minutes and get that, because in 15 minutes they may be gone. So when you see something that you need, buy it immediately. Put it in your cart immediately.
And Haskell, that's especially if there's a storm out there several days out, you're going to the store, there's going to be a rush of people. And that's probably true if you're even out ahead of it weeks or months, right? You don't know how long that supply is going to be on the shelf.
Right, absolutely. And, I really advocate that people start stocking up their pantry like in the May time frame. And if you're, like a lot of us nowadays on fixed income or tight budget, start earlier. And you don't have to get a whole lot of things like MREs and stuff like that, just start packing in a little more food that you would normally eat, non-perishable items, SpaghettiOs, Viennese sausages, just things that you can eat that don't require refrigeration. And then when hurricane season's over, start put those things into your normal grocery mix. Maybe skip a trip or two to the grocery store. And if there are things that you don't necessarily like to eat on a regular basis, take them down to the local food bank.
Well, Haskell, that's probably true for water, too. Every time there's a named storm in the Gulf, you can't find water at the store. It communicates to me that people were not prepared and they did not have an adequate water supply going into it.
Right, absolutely. You need to have about a gallon of water per person per day at a minimum. But given the fact that many times people will be working outdoors, they'll be trimming trees, they will be putting up plywood on windows, doing other things to secure their home, I really advocate having 2 gallons of water per person per day. And if you look at the average case of water, I believe it's 2 dozen bottles of water, 16.9 ounces. 3 gallons of water in each one of those cases. So that sort of helps you with your planning.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You can't live without water, and it's so useful even for washing your hands, washing off, just a bunch of uses there if you're stuck in a hurricane zone for several days. Haskell, you and I were talking about some of the big mistakes that people make, and you had mentioned one of the top ones on your list is procrastination. Why do we procrastinate? And frame this for us. I mean, help us think why we should not procrastinate when we're living in a disaster zone vulnerable to hurricanes.
Right. So there are really 5 reasons that you shouldn't procrastinate, or the 5 reasons to prepare early. First of all, it can really save you a lot of money. By starting earlier as opposed to waiting to the last minute before there's a storm out in the Gulf or headed your way, you can take advantage of sales. You can take advantage of Black Friday. You can order things on Amazon or Walmart or whatever. Also, unless there's a disaster declaration in place in your state, and this may vary from state to state, but this is, as I understand it, the case in Texas, they can raise prices at will for things like, again, plywood. As a matter of fact, before Hurricane Ike, my next door neighbor and I were going to prepare our house. We'd said early in the season we were going to cut plywood this year. It'd be the year that we do it. Well, I went down like in May and got plywood and cut it and prepared it and got the Plylocks clips and everything for my home. And I ended up spending a total of $500. Again, this is 2008 dollars. He waited until the Hurricane Ike was actually just really about to bear down on Texas, about 2 days out. He spent $1,500 for the same amount of plywood for his home. So it saves you money. It saves you time. If you have these products in home already, you have them on the shelf, you don't have to be scrambling around at the last minute, going from store to store, looking at empty shelves, trying to make compromises to get things when they've already been picked over. Reduces frustration and anxiety. Again, when you can take your time, can do product comparisons, shop wisely, it can really save you a lot of frustration. And it helps keep you safe. And if you don't think that things can get crazy before a hurricane, you've not been to Houston, Texas 24 hours before the onset of a storm. There are lines at the gas station that will stretch for hundreds or even thousands of feet. There'll be many cars in line. Frustration is rampant. Tempers flare. If you think you can't get shot over a loaf of bread or a jug of milk or something at the convenience store, you really have not seen the craziness that takes place. And then finally, it helps ensure you're fully prepared by getting these items early, getting them on your shelf, being able to check them off your checklist. Then you are ready for the storm, and you can go to bed the night before the storm and sleep reasonably comfortably, depending on the storm, but sleep knowing that you've done everything that you can to get ready for that storm.
Haskell, the one in that list that really stands out to me is the frustration and anxiety. And a lot of people that haven't lived in hurricane country, it's like, yeah, you can wait in line 2 hours to fill up with gasoline, but wouldn't you rather keep your gas tank full, have those supplies out ahead of time so you don't have to have these horror stories that your neighbors are going to have if they were unprepared. So appreciate you sharing that. The stress can be very real thing for people that go through this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the other thing too is people tend to go out at the last minute to buy a generator, and that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make. Most of the horror stories that I've heard is they go in, they walk into one of the big box hardware stores. There's pallets and pallets of emergency preparedness generators there. They grab one off. They tend to be more like construction generators. They're loud. They consume a lot of gas. They basically are not really well suited for, or maybe not the best solution for an emergency situation. They don't know what the generator will run. They don't know what their cumulative load requirement is for the home. And everybody that I've ever talked to over 20 years now, 25 years of doing this, who has failed to properly calculate the fuel requirements runs out of gasoline early. Especially these industrial generators really use a lot of gas.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then you're back to the gas line almost every day, right? Because
Right.
and this goes back to what you said, because you did not plan ahead and get the proper generator or the best one that's very fuel efficient. All of a sudden, you're really suffering for weeks, right, during an extended power outage.
Yeah. I really advocate or really recommend people to go out at the Firman, FIRMAN, Firman Power Equipment website and take a look. They have a wide range of generators, and they tend to be about half as much, especially when you apply the discount code, as some of the other leading brands of generators. Good quality equipment, really great prices.
Haskell, thanks for that guidance. I know a lot of people do want help. They want guidance with the products that they need, and this is going to help our listeners be better prepared. Haskell, when people think of hurricanes, they typically think of wind events, but you and I have talked about the flooding is what kills most of the people. It's what cumulatively causes much or most of the damage, but people often don't think of hurricanes as flood events. You've been in the Houston metro area for storms like Ike and Harvey. What are some things you saw from the flood impacts, and how should people be thinking about the dangers of flooding?
Yeah, as a direct result of the hurricane, approximately 88% of the people who perish do so by drowning. That's typically either freshwater flooding or, more importantly, storm surge. Two things you can do. First of all, heed the advice, turn around, don't drown. Don't be driving through, don't be walking through floodwaters unless it is absolutely necessary to save your life. And second of all, evacuate when you're told to do so. And be prepared to evacuate on short notice. With Hurricane Harvey, when they announced that they were getting ready to open the floodgates to release the pressure or release the water and hopefully ease the pressure on the reservoir to keep it from failing, people only had a few minutes, and the wise ones had made a go bag and were ready to go, had their supplies in the car and so forth. It can also flood much worse than expected. One of the things I always heard after significant flood events is, gee, it's never flooded here before. Well, that's because they built a mall, upstream from you, and now they've got all that runoff, or a medical center or something like that, and didn't take into account the event like a hurricane or something like that put huge amounts of water in that area that subsequently affected the floodplain. And then, of course, the other thing is not planning for supply chain distributions after the storm has passed. Those are some of the things that we learned from Hurricane Ike and Hurricane Harvey. For gosh sake, we didn't have chocolate for 2 weeks. But the medications, essential medications especially, food supplies, things simple as bread, hamburger, buns, so forth. So plan on not only to be without those things during the hurricane, but for maybe a couple of weeks afterward.
Well, Haskell, you mentioned medication, some of these supplies that are hard to get, and that really brings us into some overlooked supplies. Like, a lot of times people think preparing for a hurricane is having canned food, water, and batteries, but then they're not thinking about some of these overlooked supplies. You had mentioned medications. So how should people think about this? Should they fill out their subscriptions, try to get a longer, prescriptions with medication? How should they be prepared for that?
Yeah, certainly if you're running low and you know you're running low and are thinking that, well, after the hurricane blows over the next day, I can run down to my local drugstore and or pharmacy and get a refill, that may not happen. Again, they may be down for days or even weeks. So be sure to make sure you're stocked up on those. Work with your pharmacist. You may have to work with your insurance company to get a little bit ahead on some of those critical medications to have those on hand. Always, again, keeping in mind the potential for supply chain disruptions. Gasoline, if you're using a generator and expect to depend on that, be sure you have plenty of gasoline cans. I recommend safety cans. I use Eagle safety cans, and there's a link out on my website for those. They're expensive, but the ones that I bought back in 2005, I'm still using, so they're really, really durable and pay off in the long run. Batteries. Batteries are another thing that people frequently run out of. And let me remind you that you need to check those batteries. You need to test everything, flashlights, generators, everything that you buy that could possibly fail. You need to test that ahead of time. But even the batteries, because A, I've actually gotten bad batteries before right off the shelf. And B, I've heard cases of people who went out and bought their nice Maglite flashlight that takes D cells and then went to the store and bought C cell batteries. So they essentially had no flashlight during the duration of their power outages. And then not only big flashlights, but also smaller flashlights to have with them. A pocket light, if you will. This is the little Maglite XL50. Having a pocket light can really, really be handy, and a safety item as well. I had a good friend whose wife fell because she didn't have a flashlight. The power went out. They hadn't set up their emergency lighting yet. Fell, broke her wrist at the beginning of Hurricane Ike, and had to go for several days with a broken wrist without medical care because of that.
Haskell, what would you say to the person who says, I don't need a flashlight, my cell phone has a little light on it? I use that all the time. What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, you're burning through a battery on something that may be a lifeline. And I can guarantee you, if you need to go outside and check to see where the shingles have blown off your roof, this will do the job. This will not do the job. So, it can serve as a temporary light for short durations, but I wouldn't count on my cell phone as an emergency light source.
Haskell, you mentioned you may need to go and resupply with gas. So someone says, that's fine. I have a 5-gallon tank in my garage, and they take that down to the gas station, and the line isn't too bad. They're all excited, and they get to the pump, and there's a note saying the card reader's down, cash only. They say, well, I don't have cash. Talk to us about the importance of cash in the disaster zone when you need that food supplies, gasoline, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cash is king. After Hurricane Ike came through, we actually had a chunk of our roof shingles blown off, and the water was leaking pretty badly into the home. Fortunately, it was a new home, and I had gone around and taken photos of all the trades who had come in, and just so I would have it for reference, I took a picture of the side of their truck with their sign on it or got their card, and one of them was the roofer, and so I called him, and I said, hey, man, I've got a leak on the roof. I really could use some help out here. He said, well, we're going to need tarps. He said, there's not a tarp to be had in Houston. I said, well, I've got 6 of them in the garage. He goes, well, I don't know. I said, and I've got cash. He said, I'm on my way. So it really came in handy for that. The other thing, though, too, is like you said, I had one lady come up to me after the Harvey incident, and she had to evacuate on short notice. Single mom, had her daughter. They went to a hotel. Card reader was down. They had cash. They were able to go out to a restaurant, get something to eat. Always have cash, and don't forget small denominations. You don't want to have to show up at the local store with a $100 bill to buy milk and eggs and bread, only to find out that they're out of change as well.
Now, really good advice here, Haskell. I can tell you spent a lot of time living through hurricanes. This is practical advice that families need to hear. I wanted to ask one last question about supplies. You mentioned batteries and knowing what batteries you need. What about that battery backup for a cell phone? They make power banks now. I mean, what's the importance of getting a power bank so you can recharge your phone? Are there certain kinds that you recommend? What are your thoughts on recharging your cell phone?
Yeah, almost all of those that I buy, the small power banks are Anchor. If you need a big power bank to like run your TV, and we're really talking a power station now, something in the 1,000 watt hour range. Actually, Furman makes one of those called the Zero E. It has multiple charging outlets, both USB-A, USB-C, and a QI charger on top where you can just set your phone to charge it. As far as the smaller power banks go, I recommend having several of those. Of course, the good thing is you can recharge your power bank off of your power station if you have one of those. But again, I actually have a full box of them over there that I've tested. But the Anchor ones are my favorite. I just bought another one the other day, and like I said, I've probably got 25 power banks. So big advocate of having those on hand. Also, get quality cords to go with them. And again, I like the Anchor cords, Anker. They're out on Amazon if you shop Amazon. Get a good cord, because if you get a cheap cord, that will slow down the charging process. And if you're, say, running a generator, and one of the things you want to do is charge your phone while you're doing that, time may be of essence if you're just running it for a few minutes. So again, get good quality cords so you get maximum throughput.
Really good advice, Haskell. I hate to see people going out in their car using their limited supply of gas to charge their phone. But this is the kind of stuff that happens. And I've noticed a lot of times people think the danger in a hurricane is the day of the landfall, the wind and the water. For most people, it's really the days and weeks after the storm that are the most trying. It's I think of it almost like society's breaking down. Your power doesn't work. They don't take credit and debit cards. All of a sudden, all these things start unraveling. And I think people listening to this podcast, this conversation, it's going to help them be better prepared. And of course, we want to recommend that all of our listeners go to your website, check out the book you wrote. I think you gave me a copy at the National Tropical Weather Conference, and I read through that usually every spring, and it's amazing. Could you share one more time, what is your website and the name of the book that you've written that people can have that resource to help them read more and learn more?
Right. So the website is hidefromthewind.com. That comes from run from the water, hide from the wind, hidefromthewind.com. And the book is Hurricane Preparedness for the Home and Family. Again, you can just go to Amazon. There is a Kindle version. There is a paperback version. And interestingly, after Winter Storm Uri, I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, man, that the material in the book came in handy for the winter storm as well. About 95% of it's applicable. So it's just a great disaster preparedness book all around.
Haskell, it's the main disaster preparedness book I have on my shelf, and I refer to it often. So I really recommend that our listeners check that out. It's going to help guide you through and prepare long before the event even hits. Haskell, I can't believe we've already gone through our whole podcast here. I could talk to you forever. This is great stuff. You're really empowering audiences to be prepared ahead of time. As we wrap up this episode of the GeoTrek podcast, I wanted to ask you, what are your final thoughts? And specifically, if viewers could take just 3 actions this week to better prepare for hurricane season, what would you tell them to do?
Well, so first of all, I did want to reach out and let people know if they would like the full 1-hour hurricane preparedness session. I do those for free. All they have to do is get a hold of me. They can write to me at Haskell@hidefromthewind.com. Again, that's Haskell, Haskell@hidefromthewind.com. What I would say, final thoughts, make your 3 list. Start your emergency preparedness purchases soon. So especially for those items that may have a long lead time, and just do it. Stop procrastinating. Get busy on this stuff. Even though they're calling for a less than active season, that doesn't mean there couldn't be a hurricane in your backyard come this August.
Well, that's right, Haskell. And like they say, it only takes one in your community for it to be a bad hurricane season for you. Even if the basin has less activity than normal, everyone needs to be prepared this season.
Absolutely.
Haskell, thanks so much for joining us. Hopefully it's not an impactful hurricane season, but if it is, I know our listeners are going to be better prepared from all the great advice you gave them on this episode of the podcast and from your resources that you shared with us as well. Thanks so much for joining us, Haskell. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Hal.
Thank you so much, Haskell, for coming on the GeoTrek podcast and sharing your expertise with our audience. Wow, a lot of very practical advice. I really got three main take-home points from this. The first one, even I, who host a podcast on extreme weather and natural disasters, I was kind of surprised by this perspective that preparing ahead of time saves you not only time, but also money. A lot of times you hear people say, well, I'm glad I didn't waste money preparing for hurricane season. Nothing happened. But Haskell shared this perspective that over the long run, you're actually going to save money by preparing ahead of time. That story about the plywood that he got pre-hurricane season was much cheaper than the plywood that his friend got when there was a storm in the Gulf. And I thought, wow, over the long run, if you prepare ahead of time, you're actually going to save money, even when you account for those years where, quote unquote, nothing happened. Non-perishable food, water, a lot of these supplies we're going to use anyway. So Haskell makes a good point. You're going to save time and you're going to save money by preparing ahead of time. The second thing that I loved about this podcast are the checklists that Haskell provides. It's genius, but it's something I had not really thought of before. When I met with Haskell for the first time, he shared with me some of his resources, and I thought, wow, this is what we need, is checklists, right? So he mentioned three checklists: the Hurricane Preparedness Action Plan, the Hurricane Preparedness Essentials Shopping List, and the grocery shopping list. These are three of the checklists that he provides in his resources. But again, think about a pilot, think about an astronaut, even with all of their training and all of their expertise, they still follow the guideline of checklists. So it's something that can help guide us and help us feel less overwhelmed and make sure we don't forget anything as we're preparing for hurricanes. Number three, we always have guests on the podcast that provide really valuable insights and perspectives, but it's rare that we have a guest that provides so many resources like Haskell has here. He provided his website, hidefromthewind.com, with a lot of promotion codes for things that you can get. He's a Maglite representative, and he shared a promotion code to get a discount on an amazing Maglite flashlight. And then, of course, his book. The first time I met him, he shared his book, Hurricane Preparedness for the Home and Family. I have it right here. This is my go-to book. It's on my bookshelf. I look through it every year before hurricane season, but it is amazing. It's summarizing his decades of experience into this book. He shared how you can find this book as well, Hurricane Preparedness for the Home and Family. And it's going to provide also those checklists and the guidance that you need to get yourself prepared not only for hurricane season, but winter weather, extended power outages, anything that could affect you and your family. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this episode of the GeoTrek podcast. Our faithful listeners and our loyal listeners help consistently make us one of the top podcasts on the topic of natural disasters. I'm your host, Hurricane Hal. Thanks so much for tuning into the GeoTrek podcast. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Everyone stay safe and be prepared for this upcoming hurricane season.